The universe of vampires is one that fascinates me a lot. Always represented as these superior creatures, elegant, impeccably dressed, and living in the shadows, especially in places with Gothic architecture like castles or mansions. But behind this facade of glamour, they hide a wild and killer nature, being the most lethal creatures of literature and other medias, especially in Japanese animation. And one of the greatest examples of this is the duology of movies Vampire Hunter D, that originally comes from a manga series, but we have two anime movies, one from 1985 and another from the year 2000 called Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust, two productions that are absolutely fantastic. And the mythology of Vampire D mixtures everything that I love: monsters, horror, and cyberpunk, because it takes place in a future time, even though it has the visual style of a past time, more specifically the Victorian age. The story is very simple. We have this vampire hunter called D, and he is son of the first vampire ever, none other than Dracula himself. The problem is that his mother is human, so he was born as a hybrid, or as they call in the story, a vampire. And just like the character Blade from Marvel, for being a hybrid, he has all the strengths of a usual vampire, but none of its weakness, like for example walking during the daylight. Plus he is very stylish, wearing this black cape and huge hat. But perhaps the most interesting detail about him is that he has a parasite hand. That's right, a sensitive parasite that lives in his left hand. And it manifests with this human face and a consciousness, because he speaks with D during his adventures. And for being part of the hunter's body, he feels and knows all D's feelings. At the same time, he also helps the man by advising him and other things. I know this is the second Marvel reference I'm gonna make in this video, but he is basically the character Venom inside Eddie Brock's body in the Venom movies. Because besides knowing all the thoughts of his host, he also serves as a comic relief, making sarcastic commentaries all the time. And Vampire Hunter D has a long story with many mangas, and a gigantic universe that unfortunately I don't know very well, so here we're just gonna focus on the anime movies themselves. So for being adaptations of the manga, there might be some things here that I do not know about the whole mythology of the character that is not mentioned in the movies, but if you know, you can comment right below. But anyway, the two movies are great experiences, especially the second that we're gonna talk later. But talking about the first one that was released in 1985, called only Vampire Hunter D, tells the story of a young girl called Doris Lang. She lives in this farmhouse, and certain nights she is attacked by a vampire that bites her. Actually a lord of the vampires that wishes to transform her into a vampire so she can be his eternal wife. This causes great commotion in the small town that she lives, because she is going to transform into a vampire very soon, and this is when she hires the hunter D to find this Lord of the Vampires and kill him, by consequence removing the curse from her so that she doesn't transform. So it's a very simple, straightforward horror adventure story. The interesting thing about this anime is that its animation style is very faithful to the style of that era, which is not bad in any way, but is very similar to other productions of the 80s, like for example Saint Seiya. And what most fascinated me in this production is that even though it is a horror vampire story, mixed with elements of cyberpunk, it is very colorful. There are colors all around, even in creatures that supposedly should have a more bleak and dark color. And I really appreciated this. It's a fun adventure story, even though there's no much depth in here. You have a little romantic plot that is developed between the characters of Dory and Dee, but since he is a lonely warrior, a man with no name style of character that goes through many misadventures in different cities and with different groups of characters, his personality and story remains in mystery. But this anime doesn't restrain itself in the elements of bloodbath and a lot of action, everything we love in this kind of production. But then going to the second movie, Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust, this is where we have a great evolution in all senses regarding this mythology. The story, the animation, the characters and their developments. If the first movie is a contained, solid story, here we have the Terminator 2 for a Terminator 1 kind of idea, or Mad Max 2 to Mad Max 1. Everything is much bigger and much better. Of course, this second movie came much later in the year 2000 and is not necessarily a sequel to the first one. It's just another adapted story from one of the mangas. So the best thing about watching the first one and then this one is this break and evolution that you notice right away from the first frame. That starts with a very dark and gothic scene with the Baron Meyer, which is the villain of this movie, kidnapping a girl called Charlotte in her bedroom in the middle of the night and vanishing with the girl. So then her father and her family hire the Hunter D to go after Baron Meyer and bring the girl back, even with the possibility that she might be already dead or transformed by the vampire. And this is gonna take the Hunter D in a great adventure, at the same time that another group of hunters was also hired by the brother of the girl Charlotte to do the job, a group called the Marcus Brothers. So both Hunter D and these brothers go after the reward, and the whole thing becomes kind of a competition between them. So for this being a horror anime, of course there are gonna be enemies during the way, because Baron Meyer has his bodyguards, who are very bizarre creatures totally distinct from any vampire. And this is what I most like about this mythology. Even though it is a story about vampires, there are many different creatures along the story. We have creatures that move through the shadows. We have a shapeshifter, a woman that can bond and transform her body into any kind of material, kinda like the T-1000 from Terminator 2. She can transform into metal, she can transform into tree trunks, and we have a werewolf that has a huge mouth in the middle of his body, which is awesome in terms of visual. In the group of the Marcus Brothers, you have a character that is an old decrepit guy that is so old and sick that he is always on the bed, but he has a kind of spiritual ability. He can detach himself from his own body as a ghost, and this ghost is very overpowered because he can destroy any enemy around with a single strike. And I love that this anime has so much variety in terms of creatures mixed in the whole thing, which creates many fantastic fight scenes. But of course that we also have the emotional elements in the story coming from two different plots. Starting by the kidnapped girl, Charlotte, that after a while the heroes discover that she's actually in love by Baron Meyer, so she's running away from her own family to be with the vampire forever. Which shows that the Baron is not necessarily a villain, even though he killed some people in the past. Yet he really has a genuine love for the girl, to the point of risking his own life and walking into the sunlight to protect her. That is, they really love each other. And the other plot is that we have another hunter in the group of the Marcus Brothers that is called Layla, and slowly she becomes friends with the Vampire D, even though there is a rivalry between them. But during the movie and the fights against the enemies of Baron Meyer, a partnership starts to form between both. Starting with a gesture of kindness from D himself when he treats her wounds after a fight. And this shows the nature of this killer, that even though he is a done peer, an assassin and all that stuff, he possesses a great heart towards the humans. This was already seen in the first movie when the character Doris falls in love with him and he refuses any kind of relationship with her because he will hurt her eventually. And here we have a different scenario because when the character Layla and Dee start to approach, she reveals to him that her biggest fear is that by being this remorseless killer, she feels that when the time comes for her death, nobody will mourn her. The old scenario of the hunter that loses his soul progressively while doing this job. And I won't tell the actual ending of the anime because that would be kind of spoilerish, but There is a very beautiful scene where Dee proves her wrong in the most kind way possible. A very emotional ending that can make some people cry even. Besides this, the humanity of the vampire Dee is so well established that even the romance between Charlotte and Baron Meyer starts to make sense to him as the story progresses, even though he has a job to do. And this can change his final actions as the final battle approaches. And I also won't tell a lot about the climax of the story, but I must say that it takes place in a huge castle that is actually a space rocket that will take the couple of Charlotte and Baron Meyer away from the planet. Not only the look and the architecture of this castle is wonderful, but this whole idea of mixing futuristic ideas with the old times is simply fascinating. And this is Vampire Hunter D, two animes that if you like this idea of horror, action, a mixture of cyberpunk ideas with old-fashioned vampire stories, to have fun in this Halloween, it's a great choice. And if you wanna watch the two animes, they can be easily found right here on YouTube, so have fun. And even though I talked so much about the second movie, watch the first one as well, so you can have the whole experience of having a solid first movie that is pretty fun, and then have your mind exploded by the evolution of the second. And this is it. If you are liking the content of Trashing with Gus, please don't forget to leave your beloved like in this video, and also your amazing subscription in the channel, so we can keep trashing and talking about movies forever. Alright? See you in the next trashing video, and bye bye.